Phosphagens. Fatigue during exercise appears to be at least partially related to the decrease in phosphagens. Phosphagen concentrations in muscles are more rapidly depleted as a result of high-intensity anaerobic exercise than of aerobic exercise. Creatine phosphate can decrease markedly, 50 to 70% during the first stage, 5 through 30 seconds of high-intensity exercise, and can be almost eliminated as a result of very high-intensity exercise to exhaustion. Muscle ATP concentrations do not decrease by more than about 60% from initial values. However, even during very intense exercise, it should also be noted that dynamic muscle actions which produce external work use more metabolic energy than typically deplete phosphagens to a greater extent than do isometric muscle actions. The intramuscular ATP concentration is largely spared during exercise as a consequence of creatine phosphate depletion and because of the contribution of additional ATP from myokinase reactions and other energy sources such as glycogen and free fatty acids. Post-exercise phosphagen repletion can occur in a relatively short period. Complete resynthesis of ATP occurs within 3 to 5 minutes, and complete creatine phosphate resynthesis can occur within 8 minutes. Repletion of phosphagens is largely accomplished as a result of aerobic metabolism through fast glycolysis, although fast glycolysis can contribute to recovery after high-intensity exercise. The effects of training on concentrations of phosphagens are not well studied or understood. Aerobic training may increase resting concentrations of phosphagens and decrease their rate of depletion at a given absolute submaximal power output, but not at relative percentage of maximal submaximal power output. Although researchers have noticed indications of increased resting concentrations of phosphagens, short-term 8-week studies of sprint training have not shown alterations in resting concentrations of phosphagens. However, total phosphagen content can be larger following sprint training due to increase in muscle mass. Resistance training has been shown to increase resting concentrations of phosphagens in the tricep brachia after 5 weeks of training. The increase in phosphagen concentrations may occur due to the selective hypertrophy of type 2 muscle fibers, which can contain a higher phosphagen concentration than type 1 fibers. Glycogen. Limited stores of glycogen are available for exercise. Approximately 300 to 400 grams of glycogen are stored in the body's total muscle and about 70 to 100 in the liver. Resting concentrations of liver and muscle glycogen can be influenced by training and dietary manipulation. Research suggests that both anaerobic training, including sprinting and resistance training, and typical aerobic training can increase resting muscle glycogen concentration. The rate of glycogen depletion is related to exercise intensity. Muscle glycogen is a more important energy source than is liver glycogen during moderate and high-intensity exercise. Liver glycogen appears to be more important during low-intensity exercise, and contribution to metabolic processes increases with duration of exercise. Processes increase with duration of exercise. Increases in relative exercise intensity of 50, 75, and 100% of maximal oxygen uptake result in an increase in the rate of muscle glycolysis, glyconeogenesis, the breakdown of glycogen. Glyconolysis, the breakdown of glycogen, of 0.7, 1.4, and 3.4 millimoles per kilogram per minute, respectively. At relative intensities of exercise above 60% of maximal oxygen uptake, muscle glycogen becomes an increasingly important energy substrate. The entire glycogen content of some muscle cells can be depleted during exercise. Relatively constant blood glucose concentrations are maintained at very low exercise intensities, below 50% maximal oxygen uptake. As a result of low muscle glucose uptake, as duration increases beyond 90 minutes, blood glucose concentrations fall, but rarely below 2.8 millimoles per liter. Long-term exercise, over 90 minutes, at higher intensities above 50% maximal oxygen uptake, may result in substantially decreased blood glucose concentrations as a result of liver glycogen depletion. Hypoglycemic reactions may occur in some people with exercise-induced blood glucose values of less than 2.5 millimoles per liter. A decline in blood glucose to around 2.5 to 3.0 millimoles per liter results from reduced liver carbohydrate stores and causes decreased carbohydrate oxidation and eventually exhaustion. Very high intensity intermittent exercise such as resistance training can cause substantial depletion of muscle glycogen, decreases of 20 to 60% with relatively few sets of exercise, low total workloads. Although phosphagens may be primarily limiting factor during resistance exercise with few repetitions or home sets, muscle glycogen may become the limiting factor for resistance training with many total sets and larger total amounts of work. The type of exercise could cause selective muscle fiber glycogen depletion or depletion of type 2 muscle fibers, which can also limit performance. Training with many total sets and larger total amounts of work. This type of exercise could cause selective muscle fiber glycogen depletion or depletion in type 2 fibers, which can also limit performance. As with other types of dynamic exercise, the rate of muscle glycolysis during resistance exercise depends on the intensity. However, it appears that equal amounts of total work produce equal amounts of glycogen depletion, regardless of relative exercise intensity. Repletion of muscle glycogen during recovery is related to post-exercise carbohydrate ingestion. Repletion appears to be optimal if 0.7 to 3.0 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight is ingested every 2 hours following exercise. This level of carbohydrate consumption can maximize muscle glycogen repletion at 5 to 6 millimoles per gram of wet muscle mass per hour during the first 4 to 6 hours following exercise. Muscle glycogen may completely replenish within 24 hours provided sufficient carbohydrate ingestion. However, if the exercise has a high eccentric component associated with exercise-induced muscle damage, more time may be required completely to replenish muscle glycogen. Bioenergetic limiting factors in exercise performance. Factors limiting maximal performance must be considered in the mechanisms of fatigue experienced during exercise and training. Understanding the possible limiting factors associated with particular athletic event is required when designing training programs and attempting to delay fatigue and possibly enhance performance. Table 5.5 depicts examples of various limiting factors based on depletion of energy source and increase in muscle hydrogen ions. Glycogen depletion can be a limiting factor for long duration, low intensity exercise supported primarily by aerobic metabolism and for repeated very high intensity supported primarily by anaerobic mechanisms. Of importance to resistance training, sprinting, and other primarily anaerobic activities is the possible effect of lactic acid and increased tissue hydrogen ion concentration in both indirectly and directly limiting contractile force. Several other factors have been implicated in the development of muscle fatigue that may limit exercise performance, including increased intracellular inorganic phosphate, increased ADP, and impaired calcium release from sarcoplasmic reticulum. Further research is needed to delineate the cause of muscle fatigue and the limiting factors in exercise performance. Oxygen uptake and aerobic and anaerobic contributions to exercise. Oxygen uptake or consumption is a measure of the person's ability to take in and use oxygen during low intensity exercise with a constant power output. Oxygen uptake increases for the first few minutes until a steady state of uptake, oxygen demand equals oxygen consumption is reached. At the start of the exercise bout, however, some of the energy must be supplied through anaerobic mechanisms. This anaerobic contribution to the total energy cost of exercise is termed oxygen deficit. After exercise, oxygen uptake remains above pre-exercise levels for a period of time that varies according to the intensity and length of exercise. Post-exercise oxygen uptake has been termed oxygen debt, or the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC. The EPOC is the oxygen uptake above resting values used to restore the body's pre-existing pre-exercise condition. Only small to moderate relationship has been observed between the oxygen deficit and EPOC. The oxygen deficit may influence the size of the EPOC, but they are not equal. For the possible factors affecting EPOC are listed in Table 5.6. Anaerobic mechanisms provide much of the energy for work if the exercise intensity is above maximal oxygen uptake that a person can contain. Generally, as the contribution of anaerobic mechanisms supporting the exercise increases, the exercise duration decreases. The approximate contribution of anaerobic and aerobic mechanisms to maximal sustained efforts on a cycle ergometer is shown in Table 5.7. Contributions from anaerobic mechanisms are primarily for about 30 to 60 seconds, after which aerobic mechanisms become the primary energy supply mechanism. Thus, maximal sustained efforts to exhaustion may depend greatly on aerobic mechanisms, metabolism. The contribution of anaerobic mechanisms to this type of exercise represents the maximal aerobic capacity. Metabolic specificity of training. Appropriate exercise intensities at rest intervals can permit the selective or specific energy systems during training for specific athletic events. Few sports or physical activities require maximal sustained effort exercise to exhaustion or near exhaustion. Most sports and training activities such as football, interval jumping, sprinting, and resistance training produce metabolic profiles that are very similar to a series of high-intensity, constant, or near-constant effort exercise bouts, interspersed with rest periods. In this type of exercise, the required exercise intensity power output that must be met during each exercise bout is much greater than the maximal power output that can be sustained during aerobic energy sources. Increasing aerobic power through primary aerobic training while simultaneously compromising it or neglecting anaerobic power and anaerobic capacity training is of little benefit to athletes in these sports. Interval training. One method of training that allows appropriate metabolic systems to be stressed is interval training. Interval training is based on the concept that more work can be performed at higher exercise intensities with the same or less fatigue than in continuous training. The theoretical metabolic profile for exercise and rest intervals, stress and aerobic metabolism, fast glycolysis, and the phosphagen system is based on the knowledge of which energy system predominates during exercise and during the time of substrate recovery. The box on page 88 represents proposed exercise and rest intervals based on maximal attained power and substrate phosphagen recovery times. Combination training. Some authors have suggested that aerobic training should be added to the training anaerobic athletes. A process can be termed combination training to enhance recovery because recovery relies primarily on aerobic mechanisms. However, aerobic training may reduce anaerobic performance capabilities, particularly high strength, high power performance. Aerobic training has been shown to reduce anaerobic energy production capability in rats. Accordingly, combination anaerobic and aerobic training can reduce the gain of muscle girth, maximum strength, and especially speed and power related performance. Although the exact mechanism is not known, it does not appear that the opposite holds true. Some studies and reviews suggest that anaerobic training, strength training, can improve low intensity exercise endurance, although oxidative metabolism is important in recovery from heavy anaerobic exercise, resistance training, and sprint training. Care must be used in prescribing aerobic training for anaerobic sports. In this context, it should be noted that specific anaerobic training can simulate increase in aerobic power and enhance markers for recovery. Thus, extensive aerobic training to enhance recovery from anaerobic events is not necessary and may be counterproductive in most strength and power sports. Conclusion. Training programs with increased productivity can be designed through the understanding of how energy produced during various types of exercise and how production can be modified by specific training regimes. Which exercise system is used to supply energy for muscular contraction is determined primarily by the intensity of exercise and secondarily by the duration of the exercise. Metabolic response and training adaptations are largely regulated by exercise characteristics, intensity, duration, and recovery intervals. How these responses and adaptations occur following physical activity forms the basis of metabolic specificity in exercise training. This principle allows for enhanced athletic performance through the implementation of improved training programs.